Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Can some schizomaxers here explain to me how they think Hollow Earth works? I spend some time on it every now and then, and it appears to, admittedly very slowly, break out of internet niche discourse. I'm learning 3D art and think Hollow Earth is an interesting project for that, not only out of personal interest and creative possibilities, but also to eventually create some 3D art to better illustrate and spread the concept. While the inside of the Earth, its architecture and climate can be freely interpreted, correct me if I'm wrong, I struggle to understand how exactly gravity would work on the inside. I know that gravity as a theory is not exactly compatible with Hollow Earth, but you know what I mean. How do the inhabitants of Inner Earth stand on their feet? Is it more of a system of separated caves with differing size, or is it an inverted globe with no firmament, one in which you could raise up your head, and instead of stars, you would see the opposite side of the inner sphere many thousand miles away? Do they have a day-night cycle, considering that some models have an inner sun and some do not? With the nature of the sphere being inverted, and you being able to see every continent with your own eyes, how would that affect their philosophy? Exploration, conquest, travel. That to outer earthers is tempting because you can't see past the horizon. How would that be mirrored in Inner Earth society? Kinda losing myself here. My main question is, what the inside would actually look like in regards to gravity, day-night cycle, and if you could see the opposite side of Inner Earth by looking up like we look at the moon at night.
The Hollow Earth shell shape can be explained by pole shearing. To understand pole shearing, you have to understand the basic geometry of a field. Fields are important because all observable physical phenomena adhere to the same rules as the field. The shape of a field is toroidal, as you likely already know, the donut shape with an infinitely small hole in the center. This donut shape comes about due to the behavior of the poles. The poles are acceleration vectors spinning in toward the center point. These poles define the function of gravity, being a total lack of a given magnitude of force, and the gravity action is what drives literally everything else. The two poles, north-south, of any field spin opposite of each other and toward the center, but they do not stop at the center. The remnant of the motion is cast out the other side as magnetism, that meaning expansion. So the southern pole of any field is what pushes out the northern hemisphere of the expansion of that same field. The opposing pole directly mutes this effect, causing net interference between the inward acceleration that eventually defines the field shape. This shape is not an absolute thing, though, but rather has a gradient of possible configurations. What determines these configurations is the power of the poles. By increasing spin, the power of the pole increases. Power has nothing directly to do with energy, as the poles lack appreciable energy in their magnitude or tier. As the pole's power grows, the expansion from the other side is further muted down. This causes a spinning mass to inevitably assume a ring shape, as all the magnitude, where lesser fields can propagate, is squashed out toward the equator. Take a look at the Sombrero Galaxy, for example, or Hoag's object. Even spinning a bucket of water abides by this same principle, which is fundamentally centrifugal motion. TLDR spinning fast or over a long time makes a given mass sort into layers of density and form rings.
I'm not OP, but like this? My science is lacking, so I don't understand, but does it work like a Birkeland current?
The Birkeland current is virtually just a series of fields stacked on top of each other. So yes, in a way you are right. It's important to note that the field geometry is also present in a one-directional wave. A sine wave is the visible half of a field. All waves propagate in a self-mirroring pattern. If you ever watch the Matrix movies, the heat trails following the bullets in the slow-motion shots is exactly what I'm talking about. These trails are a series of compression and rarefaction, repeated over the distance traveled. This shape is also the reason certain eels and snakes move around the way they do. It's the easiest way for a string to move through a fluid.
I see, so like this then. Thank you for the clarification.
This is a really good illustration of what I was spurging out about.
Based off that, it makes me think these findings basically reflect the 7 Hermetic principles, which would mean these are the fundamental laws that form this reality. Of course, I may be off, but I'm no scientist or anything like that. I'm just someone with free time and curiosity.
You might appreciate The Universal One by Walter Russell. One thing he constantly mentions in the book is how all things are the product of one thinking mind. Everything in your image is present in the book, though possibly worded or named differently. These precepts must be fundamental to the makeup of reality. This image is a diagram from the book where he predicts various observable physical phenomena. He predicted all of the elements of the periodic table, some of which haven't even been discovered yet and has not been wrong once. As for the inner sun, I'm of the idea that it's a result of the solid liquid metals in the Earth shell, moving on such a vast scale that they collectively generate an electrical charge or plasma field, similarly to the way the Earth's magnetic field is generated. Perhaps some of the luminescence is light from the sun that is bent, carried along the edge or bands of the magnetic field, and trapped in the interior center, functionally a 0 point. This miniature false sun would function somewhat similarly to a lower magnitude of black hole, only operating on energetic levels rather than massive levels, slowly leaking trapped light and electromagnetism back out as dull illumination and jettisoning more from the poles. Perhaps this has something more to do with the aurora borealis. As a side, fields do not spring forth from a center point. They have a center point of their own, but the field geometry itself is more akin to a depression in the medium that results from sufficient coherent mass being present in a given place. While we can't exactly guess the width of the portals, we can determine the rough distance traveled when sailing from the exterior to the interior. The thickness of the shell and crust is about 800 miles from the outside to the inside. This is the surface we walk on. If the Earth is hollow, this crust must be quite dense, by protracting the density of igneous material, granite, magma, carbon, etc., and the average density of metals, iron, copper, gold, etc. Across the entire about 8,000-mile diameter of the Earth, and comparing it to the measurable pull of gravity, you can roughly approximate the thickness of the shell. 800 miles is still really thick, but it's only a tenth of the diameter of the planet. By doubling this, you find that there's about 6,400 miles of open air inside the planet, but that's not relevant to the journey's distance. Use this 800 miles figure and determine the circumference of the bend from the exterior to the interior. 2 times pi times r, or 2 pi 800 equals 2,513.274 miles full circumference, divided by 2. Only traveling 1/2 of this bend equals 1,256.637 miles, approximately traveled to sail from the outside to the inside, or vice versa, plus whatever amount of miles needed to reach port. That's about 1/4 of the journey from Europe to the US, about 4,500 to 5,000 miles, just to get directly under where you started.
There are people inside our planet that are far more powerful than any individual or organization living on the surface. They have contacted us repeatedly. They try to share wisdom and technology with us occasionally. When one of our civilizations advances enough to meet certain criteria they have, they block most of us from entrance. We are not allowed down, and mostly for our own good. These threads you see of vast underground facilities, these are failed attempts to get inside. The truth is like something out of a couple of sci-fi horror movies you might be familiar with. The sphere and event horizon show something like what is down there, an energy field that causes our thoughts to manifest in physical reality. Heaven and hell at once. It is completely pointless to try and get down there without permission. The beings keeping us out are far more powerful, mentally, and they are living deep in the field. It gives them power that most people would describe as godlike. Even if we were somehow able to harness the same power up here on the surface, our ability to use it would be like a silly joke compared to what these beings are capable of. The danger isn't just from us being exposed to the field and creating our nightmares, though. There are lots of people stuck down there in it. The field warps their minds warp their bodies. They fall further and further from humanity and turn into abominations. This is the source of most humanoid cryptids. The field can physically mutate people instantly, especially if they are intoxicated somehow. The planet is not hollow like a basketball. It is hollow like puffed rice. It is completely riddled with cave systems past a certain depth of about 10 miles. The field I am talking about is luminescent. There are forests and animals in these cave systems. The cave systems are the source of life on the surface. They are filled with prehistoric megaflora and megafauna. The sun damages and mutates everything on the surface. Evolution is really just a description of the long and slow degeneration and cretinism caused by sun damage. Everything up here is just a shrunken, weakened, and sick version of what naturally occurs down there, humans included. Stories of people being 8 to 10 feet tall and living for centuries were true. Humans able to live in the field have lifespans in the thousands of years. Their women do not have the same kind of pain and danger in childbirth because they are huge. There are lakes and rivers and seas down there as well, also filled with massive prehistoric plants and animals. There are dinosaurs and megalodon and mushrooms the size of houses and insects as big as dogs, as well as groups of strange and mutated humans. If you go down there and you are intoxicated in any way, it's over. The field will react with your intoxicated mind and instantly warp your body. It is something to do with something like your homunculus. If something warps your perceptions of your own body down there, it physically warps your body as a side effect. The megaflora is the real hazard down there, not the gigantic predatory animals. Just like everything at the surface is a weakened and degenerate version of what is down there, so it is with hallucinogenic plants and fungi. Imagine a 10-minute DMT trip, except your perception of those 10 minutes is as 10 million years, and the hallucination is perceived as more real than reality itself. Most drugs we encounter up here just slightly alter our perceptions of reality, but down there it is different. The combined hazard of the field and the drastically increased potency of the drugs in much of the fauna down there make for a terrible hazard. Water has many poorly understood electromagnetic properties. One thing we know about it is that it can store or be imparted with certain characteristics. Water memory is the common term. There are some places on Earth where water comes up from extreme depth, and it carries this field within it. Stories of hot, steamy valleys filled with prehistoric life, found and kept secret by scientists for ecological preservation, or just found and never found again, are accounts of these places. They are passages up places where water and steam is being forced up. They open and close due to seismic events. There are other places where water runs down, usually nearby a place where steam is coming up. Plants and animals sometimes make their way up to the surface through these passages. The steam and hot water carries enough of the field's energy to sustain some of these things that would die from sun exposure otherwise. In the past, some of these vents have remained open for thousands of years. Native Americans have many stories about places and pools of water like this, often warning of their danger. They describe many different types of creatures as beings of two worlds, Sasquatch being one of these creatures, shapeshifters another. Typically, they tell of them being present in certain areas, also associated with strange phenomenon and occurrences. The practice of avoiding and averting their eyes from certain places as they pass them comes from this. If a place or a pool of water is charged up enough with this field's energy, a human can alter reality around it by accident, and many of these places are already inhabited by strange creatures and lost, mutated humanoids, fuel for nightmares. The other world that these creatures live in is real and underneath our feet. Magic and a lot of esoteric practices are just attempts to control the interaction between this field and the human mind. The field exists here at the surface, it is just very weak. People who are more sensitive to it are labeled as mentally ill and given drugs that numb them and utterly destroy their ability. If the real effect of mind-altering drugs became known, if it became known that there were places these people could go that would do the opposite, and amplify their perceptions and ability to alter reality, the lowest of us, the most degenerate and disconnected from our source, the wealthy and powerful would lose everything. Their grip on humanity would be smashed. The planet we live on hates them too.
You speak in ways that mean little to my human brain, but you certainly tickle the rest in some fashion.
Your brain colors your perceptions. These are different colors of the same perceptions, like the three blind men and the elephant. There is something down there that explains everything, and we have fooled ourselves into thinking otherwise.
How can we get to that place?
I don't know. There are ways to climb, hike, and swim down, but I have no idea how you would find them. Would probably be really easy to get lost on the way down without a guide. No radio or GPS, no maps, no light. Plus, if you are on the right track, then there might be dangerous animals and monster-type things. I think maybe you have to find a place where lots of water is making its way down. It gets way too hot at shallow depths in some places to make it without cooking, so any way down would likely involve swimming or diving. I guess the most surefire way would be to find someplace inland where a lot of groundwater was accumulating and taking a while to make it out to the ocean. Somewhere it is running down instead of sideways. Hydrologists don't really have a better idea of what is going on down there than geologists do, though, unfortunately. Glaciers might be another indicator of a place where water has made a path down and the earth is cooled deeper than in other spots. I guess that would be the general idea. Finding places where the earth is being cooled at extreme depths by water but not completely underwater. Also, anywhere you would have steam escaping. You would also find cold air being sucked down somewhere nearby. Just like when there is hot water coming up, there is cold water making its way down from somewhere else nearby. One common theme of these prehistoric valleys you read about being found from time to time is steam and very high humidity. There are multiple accounts of places like this going back quite a while. Secluded little valleys and canyons with prehistoric plants and animals. Weird shit seems to come up in places where these natural heat exchanges are breaking holes through the crust with steam and water pressure.
If it's so difficult to get down there, then how are there transformed humanoids down there that came from the surface? Did you see these things through remote viewing?
There have probably been humans living down there for as long as they have been living up here, maybe longer. We had to have come from down there, or from some other world entirely. There is no way we evolved on the surface here. The sun causes the opposite to happen. Groups of humans are allowed down sometimes, some groups of people that have been rejected and driven out or have fled to slowly degenerate into animals here at the surface. The humans down there don't have the same kind of technology we do, because things work so differently. Most of our electronics would start malfunctioning if we took them down there, and would be irreparably damaged past a certain point.
Anan, what makes you believe these things? What have you seen?
Lots of people have seen lots of things. Maybe there's nothing I've seen that you need to see, except what to ignore. Most people go looking through reports and stories and books about alien life forms and deities and cryptids for reasons that are pointless. Maybe try looking at things like that, assuming that beings from other places contact humans and share things with us very intentionally, things that get lost and forgotten because of academics who lie for clout and money. Or maybe because of the governments of the world or big companies and rich assholes. There are really lots of reasons that things are ignored, or reasons they were swept under the rug in the past. Not everything is successfully hidden from you.
Implying Earth is a globe, dropped.
I have no idea if it is a globe or not. I'm telling you that we don't even know what is going on 10, 15 miles beneath our feet. I guess I said planet, but we don't know what it is that we are standing on. All of that is beyond the scope of this thread so far. I also provided a scientific explanation for Yggdrasil, a giant tree with roots miles deep, right next to a hot spring pool with magical properties, and a cold water pool to supply it all. This is a tree trunk stump, not even joking. It had roots that went all the way down to the source of the hot spring it grew on top of, 10+ miles down, deep into the luminescent field. The field drastically alters the epigenetic characteristics of whatever is living in it. If you knew what species of tree that was and what form it had degenerated to on the surface here, you could induce it to produce seeds with restored genetic function, if you knew how. When prehistoric animals thought to be extinct reappear, it is not always from something coming up to the surface. Sometimes the field strength is high enough up here to undo some of the damage caused by the sun. When trout appear with a kite-hook jaw like a salmon, when wild apple trees produce apples instead of crab apples, it is the result of this field acting on DNA.
Who cut down the tree?
I don't know if they were cut down. The west coast of North America used to have huge active volcano cones from Mexico to Alaska. All that remains of them are a small handful of active volcanoes and a bunch of eroded lava blobs that were underground when all of the volcanoes were exploding and spewing lava. Something like 2/3 of Washington state is covered by a sheet of basalt from rivers of lava spewing all over and covering the entire place with 2 to 3 miles of rock. The trees seem to live in very specific conditions. If you think about the age of something that huge, it could just be that the seismic activity of the Earth could be what kills them eventually. It could also very easily be the case that with modern drilling technology, we could possibly create habitats for these trees. Trees act like natural heat sinks and have a significant cooling effect on the ground underneath them. They constantly transport water from the ground up into the air, where it evaporates and transfers significant amounts of heat into the air in the form of humidity. A forest of giant trees would have a huge impact and likely begin to start creating its own weather systems like glaciers.
Is this where the pale crawler humanoids come from?
There are all kinds of weird and mutated things down there. There is much more surface area down there than there is up here. The size of the habitable areas down there are maybe 5 to 20 times what is up here. It is completely wild and untamed. There are people in it in some places, but they are very different from us, and there are drug-mutated creatures that used to be human, and some of them probably eat each other. It is also possible that there are some kinds of predators that just appear human to lure in prey.
This includes THC. Fuck.
The reason things are so different down there, the reasons this strange field forms, are to do with electromagnetism. Part of the degeneration and DNA-altering ability of it is touched on in a book that is popular here called The Adam and Eve Story. The author of that book got a lot wrong, but he referenced some experiments on rats to do with altering the magnetic field in which they lived. The Earth is magnetic. It has poles. The magnetic lines of force extend out for thousands and thousands of miles from the surface. Under the surface, though, all those magnetic lines of force that go out into space are compressed. You can see it in just about any basic physics textbook. Almost all of them have some kind of diagram like this when explaining magnets. When you go down deep enough below the surface, you get into places where the magnetic field strength is drastically stronger than it is at the surface. It is scientifically proven that a lack of a magnetic field causes DNA to mutate and degenerate catastrophically and rapidly, and that it also causes horrific behavior in animals, murder and assaults and cannibalism. A strong magnetic field does the opposite, unless a creature's body is being thrown out of balance by drugs.
Admiral Richard B. Byrd's diary, February-March 1947. The exploration flight over the North Pole. The Inner Earth. My secret diary. I must write this diary in secrecy and obscurity. It concerns my Arctic flight on the 19th day of February in the year of 1947. There comes a time when the rationality of men must fade into insignificance, and one must accept the inevitability of the truth. I am not at liberty to disclose the following documentation in this writing. Perhaps it shall never see the light of public scrutiny, but I must do my duty and record here for all to read one day. In a world of greed and exploitation of certain of mankind can no longer suppress that which is truth. Flight log, base camp, Arctic, February 19, 1947, 0600 hours. All preparations are complete for our flight northward, and we are airborne with full fuel tanks at 0610 hours. 0620 hours. Fuel mixture on starboard engine seems too rich, adjustment made, and Pratt Whitneys are running smoothly. 0730 hours. Radio check with base camp. All is well, and radio reception is normal. 0740 hours. Note, slight oil leak in starboard engine. Oil pressure indicator seems normal, however. 0800 hours. Slight turbulence noted from easterly direction at altitude of 2321 feet. Correction to 1700 feet. No further turbulence, but tailwind increases. Slight adjustment in throttle controls. Aircraft performing very well now. 0815 hours. Radio check with base camp. Situation normal. 0830 hours. Turbulence encountered again. Increased altitude to 2900 feet. Smooth flight conditions again. 910 hours. Vast ice and snow below. Note coloration of yellowish nature, and disperse in a linear pattern. Altering course for a better examination of this color pattern below. Note reddish or purple color also. Circle this area 2 full turns and return to assigned compass heading. Position check made again to base camp, and relay information concerning colorations in the ice and snow below. 910 hours. Both magnetic and gyro compasses begin to gyrate and wobble. We are unable to hold our heading by instrumentation. Take bearing with the sun compass, yet all seems well. The controls are seemingly slow to respond and have sluggish quality, but there is no indication of icing. 915 hours. In the distance are what appears to be mountains. 949 hours. 29 minutes elapsed flight time from the first sighting of the mountains. It is no illusion. They are mountains and consist of a small range that I have never seen before. 955 hours. Altitude changed to 2950 feet, encountering strong turbulence again. 1,000 hours. We are crossing over the small mountain range and still proceeding northward as best as can be ascertained. Beyond the mountain range is what appears to be a valley with a small river or stream running through the center portion. There should be no green valley below. Something is definitely wrong and abnormal here. We should be over ice and snow. To the port side are great forests growing on the mountain slopes. Our navigation instruments are still spinning. The gyroscope is oscillating back and forth. 1,005 hours. I alter altitude to 1,400 feet and execute a sharp left turn to better examine the valley below. It is green with either moss or a type of tight-knit grass. The light here seems different. I cannot see the sun anymore. We make another left turn, and we spot what seems to be a large animal of some kind below us. It appears to be an elephant. No! It looks more like a mammoth. This is incredible. Yet, there it is. Decrease altitude to 1,000 feet and take binoculars to better examine the animal. It is confirmed. It is definitely a mammoth-like animal. Report this to base camp. 10:30 hours. Encountering more rolling green hills now. The external temperature indicator reads 74 degrees Fahrenheit. Continuing on our heading now. Navigation instruments seem normal now. I am puzzled over their actions. Attempt to contact base camp. Radio is not functioning. 11:30 hours. Countryside below is more level and normal, if I may use that word. Ahead we spot what seems to be a city. This is impossible. Aircraft seems light and oddly buoyant. The controls refuse to respond. My God. Off our port and starboard wings are a strange type of aircraft. They are closing rapidly alongside. They are disc-shaped and have a radiant quality to them. They are close enough now to see the markings on them. This is fantastic. Where are we? What has happened? I tug at the controls again. They will not respond. We are caught in an invisible vice grip of some type. 11:35 hours. Our radio crackles, and a voice comes through in English with what perhaps is a slight. The message is, "Welcome, Admiral, to our domain. We shall land you in exactly 7 minutes. Relax, Admiral, you are in good hands." I note the engines of our plane have stopped running. The aircraft is under some strange control and is now turning itself. The controls are useless. 11:40 hours. Another radio message received. We begin the landing process now, and in moments the plane shudders slightly and begins a descent as though caught in some great unseen elevator. The downward motion is negligible, and we touch down with only a slight jolt. 11:45 hours. I am making a hasty last entry in the flight log. Several men are approaching on foot toward our aircraft. They are tall. In the distance is a large shimmering city, pulsating with rainbow hues of color. I do not know what is going to happen now, but I see no signs of weapons on those approaching. I hear now a voice ordering me by name to open the cargo door. I comply. End log. From this point, I write all the following events here from memory. It defies the imagination and would seem all but madness if it had not happened. The radio man and I are taken from the aircraft, and we are received in a most cordial manner. We were then boarded on a small platform-like conveyance with no wheels. It moves us toward the glowing city with great swiftness. As we approach, the city seems to be made of a crystal material, Soon we arrive at a large building that is a type I have never seen before. It appears to be right out of the design board of Frank Lloyd Wright, or perhaps more correctly, out of a Buck Rogers setting. We are given some type of warm beverage which tasted like nothing I have ever savored before. It is delicious. After about 10 minutes, 2 of our wondrous-appearing hosts come to our quarters and announce that I am to accompany them. I have no choice but to comply. I leave my radio man behind, and we walk a short distance and enter into what seems to be an elevator. We descend downward for some moments, the machine stops, and the door lifts silently upward. We then proceed down a long hallway that is lit by a rose-colored light that seems to be emanating from the very walls themselves. One of the beings motions for us to stop before a great door. Over the door is an inscription that I cannot read. The great door slides noiselessly open, and I am beckoned to enter. One of my hosts speaks. "Have no fear, Admiral. You are to have an audience with the Master." I step inside and my eyes adjust to the beautiful coloration that seems to be filling the room completely. Then I begin to see my surroundings. What greeted my eyes was the most beautiful sight of my entire existence. It is in fact too beautiful and wondrous to describe. It is exquisite and delicate. I do not think there exists a human term that can describe it in any detail with justice. My thoughts are interrupted in a cordial manner by a warm, rich voice of melodious quality. "I bid you welcome to our domain, Admiral." I see a man with delicate features and with the etching of years upon his face. He is seated at a long table. He motions me to sit down in one of the chairs. After I am seated, he places his fingertips together and smiles. He speaks softly again and conveys the following. "We have let you enter here because you are of noble character and well known on the surface world, Admiral." "Surface world," I half gasp under my breath. "Yes," the Master replies with a smile. "You are in the domain of the Ariani, the inner world of the Earth. We shall not long delay your mission, and you will be safely escorted back to the surface and for a distance beyond. But now, Admiral, I shall tell you why you have been summoned here. Our interest rightly begins just after your race exploded the first atomic bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan. It was at that alarming time we sent our flying machines, the Flugelrods, to your surface world to investigate what your race had done. That is, of course, past history now, my dear Admiral, but I must continue on. You see, we have never interfered before in your race's wars and barbarity. But now we must, for you have learned to tamper with a certain power that is not for man, namely, that of atomic energy. Our emissaries have already delivered messages to the powers of your world, and yet they do not heed. Now you have been chosen to be witness here that our world does exist. You see, our culture and science is many thousands of years beyond your race, Admiral." I interrupted. "But what does this have to do with me, sir?" The Master's eyes seemed to penetrate deeply into my mind, and after studying me for a few moments, he replied, "Your race has now reached the point of no return. For there are those among you who would destroy your very world rather than relinquish their power as they know it." I nodded, and the Master continued, "In 1945 and afterward, we tried to contact your race, but our efforts were met with hostility. Our Flugelrods were fired upon. Yes, even pursued with malice and animosity by your fighter planes. So now I say to you, my son, there is a great storm gathering in your world, a black fury that will not spend itself for many years. There will be no answer in your arms. There will be no safety in your science. It may rage on until every flower of your culture is trampled, and all human things are leveled in vast chaos. Your recent war was only a prelude of what is yet to come for your race. We here see it more clearly with each hour. Do you say I am mistaken?" "No," I answer. "It happened once before. The Dark Ages came and they lasted for more than 500 years. "Yes, my son," replied the Master. "The Dark Ages that will come now for your race will cover the earth like a pall. But I believe that some of your race will live through the storm. Beyond that, I cannot say. We see at a great distance a new world stirring from the ruins of your race, seeking its lost and legendary treasures, and they will be here, my son, safe in our keeping. When that time arrives, we shall come forward again to help revive your culture and your race. Perhaps by then, You will have learned the futility of war and its strife. And after that time, certain of your culture and science will be returned for your race to begin anew. You, my son, are to return to the surface world with this message. With these closing words, our meeting seemed at an end. I stood for a moment as in a dream, but yet I knew this was reality, and for some strange reason I bowed slightly, either out of respect or humility, I do not know which. Suddenly, I was again aware that the two beautiful hosts who had brought me here were again at my side. "This way, Admiral," motioned one. I turned once more before leaving and looked back toward the master. A gentle smile was etched on his delicate and ancient face. "Farewell, my son," he spoke. Then he gestured with a lovely, slender hand a motion of peace, and our meeting was truly ended. Quickly we walked back through the great door of the master's chamber and once again entered into the elevator. The door slid silently downward, and we were at once going upward. One of my hosts spoke again. "We must now make haste, Admiral, as the master desires to delay you no longer on your scheduled timetable, and you must return with his message to your race." I said nothing. All of this was almost beyond belief, and once again my thoughts were interrupted as we stopped. I entered the room and was again with my radio man. He had an anxious expression on his face. As I approached, I said, "It is all right, Howie. It is all right." The two beings motioned us toward the awaiting conveyance. We boarded, and soon arrived back at the aircraft. The engines were idling, and we boarded immediately. The whole atmosphere seemed charged now with a certain air of urgency. After the cargo door was closed, the aircraft was immediately lifted by that unseen force until we reached an altitude of 2,700 feet. Two of the aircraft were alongside for some distance, guiding us on our return way. I must state here, the airspeed indicator registered no reading, yet we were moving along at a very rapid rate. 215 hours. A radio message comes through. "We are leaving you now, Admiral. Your controls are free. Auf Wiedersehen." We watched for a moment as the flugelrods disappeared into the pale blue sky. The aircraft suddenly felt as though caught in a sharp downdraft for a moment. We quickly recovered her control. We do not speak for some time. Each man has his thoughts. Entry in flight. Log continues. 220 hours. We are again over vast areas of ice and snow, and approximately 27 minutes from base camp. We radio them, and they respond. We report all conditions normal. Normal. Base camp expresses relief at our re-established contact. 300 hours. We land smoothly at base camp. I have a mission. End log entries. March 11th, 1947. I have just attended a staff meeting at the Pentagon. I have stated fully my discovery and the message from the master. All is duly recorded. The president has been advised. I am now detained for several hours. 6 hours, 39 minutes to be exact. I am interviewed intently by top security forces and a medical team. It was an ordeal. I am placed under strict control via the national security provisions of the United States of America. I am ordered to remain silent in regard to all that I have learned on the behalf of humanity. Incredible. I am reminded that I am a military man and I must obey orders. December 30th, 1956. Final entry. These last few years elapsed since 1947 have not been kind. I now make my final entry in this singular diary. In closing, I must state that I have faithfully kept this matter secret as directed all these years. It has been completely against my values of moral right. Now I seem to sense the long night coming on, and this secret will not die with me, but as all truth shall, it will triumph, and so it shall. This can be the only hope for mankind. I have seen the truth, and it has quickened my spirit and has set me free. I have done my duty toward the monstrous military-industrial complex. Now, the long night begins to approach, but there shall be no end. Just as the long night of the Arctic ends, the brilliant sunshine of truth shall come again, and those who are of darkness shall fall in its light. For I have seen that land beyond the pole, that center of the great unknown. Admiral Richard E. Byrd, United States Navy, the 24th of December, 1956.
Eels come from hollow earth. No one knows how eels reproduce. Aristotle thought that eels were a form of sea worm which came from within the earth underwater. Modern scientists have figured out roughly where eels come into being by finding the population of young eels. European and American eels are in-pick related, New Zealand eels come from around Tonga, and Japanese eels come from around the Marianas Islands. All these locations share being near deep sea trenches. We also know Earth is not completely solid. There are parts of the planet that are not as dense, which could imply the existence of hollow pockets or even pockets of water. So someone is clearly hiding the truth about the hollow earth eels. But why?
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.